welcome everybody to this special event dealing with gender bias and neuroscience. My name is Dilana Hangano-Opatz. I'm professor for neurophysiology at University Medical Center Hamburg here in Germany. I chair this meeting as representative of the Committee for Higher Education of FENS and as FENS-Kavli Network of Excellence scholar. And I have the pleasure to chair this session not alone, but also with my colleague and friend Ilka Diester from University of Freiburg. She's professor of physiology, an optophysiology, a matter of fact, and she's also a scholar of the FENS-Kavli Network of Excellence. Before we get started, I would like to say a few words. When we were planning to do such event at FENS Forum here in Berlin, I was firstly thought, and this is a personal note here, that I'm not the right person for doing this event, because I never saw myself as a feminist, but I always thought, well, it's normal to be equal. Man and woman in science, it's an equal issue, so I never thought about this. And I was thinking to design this event a little bit different than was planned. So don't be surprised that the name change. It's not woman in neuroscience anymore, but dealing with gender bias. And the reason for this change will be mirrored. It's the fact that in the last years, decades, we had certainly a huge improvement in the chances that women have in science. There are many programs. There is an intensive coaching program for women, and I think the quality of the woman scientists is absolutely excellent. But, and it's a big but here, there is still a huge need to improve and to change mentality, and it's a question also of fairness of treatment of women and males in a competition or in a normal, let's say, scientific life. And why I think it is like that, when, as I said, I personally thought that it's always no problem with with the fact that I'm a woman in science. And I thought this long time, and those that know me for a while, they know that I always consider that, at least on my career, I never experienced bad situation being a woman, but I experienced support and equal chances. However, there is a mentality that need to be changed, and I will give you also a personal example why I think this is necessary. My husband and I, we are both full professors, and we commute since more than 7 years. And when my husband discussed with a dean at a German university last year, and this dean was not an old person, but was in my age or in our age, and was complaining about commuting and the difficulty to get 2 full professorships in the same city, then the response of the dean was, and this is very surprising, well, you married the wrong woman. My wife is housewife. This is in Germany. This was 2017. And this is really frightening. Because until this experience, I never thought that this sentence can come. But apparently, there is a lot of things that should be done. In my opinion, that the chances are equal. It's maybe not so correct. Maybe I was lucky. But it's a lot of issues need or should be improved in the next years. We are not sure that this, or we hope that this event will contribute in a way or the other to this, and we hope that the discussion afterwards are exactly meant for that. So we would like to know what are the problems and maybe to come up with common solutions. However, this event is meant to bring some ideas and facts about female and male scientists, and also from a funny perspective, from a very, very, let's say, critical perspective. And we would be very happy to get your feedback at the end and to know what are your problems. This is why at the end of the meeting, we'll have the opportunity to discuss with you. So please feel free to ask questions and raise critical points, because otherwise we will never progress if we don't know where exactly the big problems are present. So thank you for coming, and I would like to say something that I'm very pleased to see also male scientists in this room. So indeed, this is not just a seminar for women or a special event, women in neuroscience, but it should be dealing with both genders. Okay, so we will now move to numbers and facts, and we were very pleased to have here Theodor Papazoglou from the ERC, and he will give us some information about gender bias, if any, at European level. So thank you for coming, and we're looking for you.
Thank you. Good evening. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting us to come here and share with you some, as the title of the intervention states, numbers and facts. So my presentation will probably be much drier than the previous one, which was very inspirational. But still, I think it is very important to talk about evidence, to talk about numbers. And the reason for this is because the European Research Council, in addition to being a research council, funding research, it's also a continuous experiment, trying new things and see how they work. So this is probably the most boring part of the presentation, because just to state that there is political incentive, there is political pressure for gender equality, and therefore people who sign an agreement, not only with the ERC, but also for any kind of funding from the European Commission, they do need to respect some provisions that they are appearing in this grant agreement. And these provisions talk about equal opportunities to men and women during the implementation of the action, but also they warn about consequences in case of non-compliance. However, this is legal talk, and experience up to now has proven that this is not always very helpful, not very productive. And as I said, the ERC, in the ERC, the strategy is developed, is established by scientists who know what's happening in the field, what is happening in the field, and therefore they come up with additional measures. And one of them is, for example, this ERC Gender Action Plan that was established already in 2008 and has been renewed for the period 2014-2020. But I will talk about it a little bit later. The Scientific Council of the European Research Council is responsible for establishing the scientific strategy, and among other things, were from the very beginning of the establishment of the ERC, came up with a series of working groups, standing committees, who were there to tackle various issues that they thought are important for the proper operation of the ERC. And one of them was the working group on gender balance. In 2008, this working group was established, and it very quickly came up with some priorities. Important one is informing and raising awareness. Secondly, giving equal opportunities and treatment to men and women when they apply for ERC funding. Very importantly, and this is what the presentation is all about, monitoring, taking evidence from the evaluations, taking evidence from the follow-up of the science that is being supported by the ERC. And finally, looking, and this is more of the responsibility of the peer review system, to make sure that gender has been taken into account during the grants. So they established a gender equality plan in 2008, and then they had, as I said, renewed it. This gender equality plan is more or less along the objectives, as I just mentioned, so awareness raising, remove gender bias, if any, during evaluation, improve gender balance in ERC calls, for example, in terms of the attraction to principal investigators from both genders, and the presence of both genders in the teams around the principal investigators, and monitoring any differences that occur during the career perspective. That means we have observed that ERC funding becomes quite important in the career perspectives of individuals, so one needs to be very interesting to see how this is done. And finally, of course, gender awareness in all ERC processes. The Scientific Council, in addition to establishing a plan, they also came with very concrete actions while establishing the strategy. And the main tool for them in order to do that was through the annual work program. So already from 2007, they introduced, especially for the younger part of the potential pool of applicants, so for the starters and later for the consolidators part of the ERC applicants, they established specific provisions allowing especially women to participate, taking into account possible career breaks during their scientific career up to the moment of the application. So for example, already in 2007, they introduced an eligibility extension to the eligibility window for young investigators, 12 months per child born after the PhD award. You see the list of all these interventions over the years since 2007. Most of them are reflected in the text of the work program. Then they intervened also at the level of the evaluation platform, so the way the proposal is being presented, giving a very specific format to the CV, which does not allow, ideally, I should say, any differences in the way the applicants present themselves, but also extending the eligibility windows. Finally, what has been intensified during the last 3 to 4 years is continuous awareness raising towards the panels, the evaluation panels. So this is during the standard briefing that is taking place in the beginning of every evaluation, the use of multimedia, so we have some videos that they're being used, and finally, and this is the latest part, is training the scientific officers of the ERC towards detecting perhaps at a very early stage, or sometimes they say subconscious gender bias during the evaluation. So this is an ongoing, so our scientific officers are now being trained for gender bias or detecting gender bias. Now let me go into the numbers part of the presentation. This is how it looks, and I have split this period or this historical perspective of performance of men and women applicants into 2 periods during the first 7 years of the ERC, so what has been covered through the previous framework program for research and development, 2007-2013, and you see that no matter what the funding scheme is, or to say it differently, the career range that the funding is targeting, we see a very consistent higher performance in terms of success rate of men over women. So STG is starting grants, so 2 to 7 years after a PhD award. COG is a consolidator grants, so 7 to 12 years after a PhD award, and advanced grants are for the senior scientists. And you see that there is a consistent difference in terms of success rate, which overall ended up by 2013 to have a difference of 3% points between men and women. In Horizon 2020, and these are average, of course, numbers, so basically dividing per funding scheme again the number of proposals who are successful over those who are over the number of proposals submitted. Things have improved, or at least it looks they're a little bit more balanced. So in the case of consolidators, for example, we have overall and up to now a slightly overperformance of women applicants over men. In advanced grants, so at the senior level of scientists or senior scientist level, we have a very well-balanced situation. and for the younger part of our applicants, we still have a small difference in terms of success rate. Overall, however, the success rate has been quite balanced. If we see the same situation in terms of the domains, and the world of research for the ERC is divided during evaluation in three main domains: LS for life sciences, PE for physical sciences and engineering, and SH for social sciences and humanities. You will see again the same two big periods, FP7, that means 2007, 2013, and then more recent years. And again, here the situation has improved. Perhaps you would be more interested in the differences in the life sciences, since it is a life sciences conference. And you see that during the first period, in fact, the biggest difference in terms of success rate was observed in the life sciences. In Horizon 2020, so the current framework program that ERC is part of, we see that these differences have been reduced. However, for the life sciences, the difference still is about 2% points, favoring still the male applicants. Whereas in physical science and engineering, the situation has been reversed, and for social science and humanities, it's quite comparable. What is interesting to see is to go at the level of panels, evaluation panels, because these numbers I presented until now, they're quite average, big numbers, just dividing successful applicants over applicants. But if one does go at the level, at the resolution of a single panel, and this is a very easy, in fact, matrix to describe. So basically, you can see again the various calls. So the year will tell you which year the call took place. And on the horizontal axis, we have the panels. We have 25 panels, so one level of resolution under the domain, PE, LS, and SH. We have for each domain a series of panels that they are active every time we have a call in order to evaluate the proposals. And the greener it is, the higher the presence of female scientists in terms of number of applications. The redder the cell is, the smaller the presence of women in this particular call is. So what could one say overall is that in general we have very low presence or a very unbalanced situation in terms of applications in the physical science and engineering, and in particular in the senior sciences level. It's very red. Whereas for social science and humanities, and especially in particular the younger scientists, so top right part, where the starting grant is 2 to 7 years after PhD, we have a quite balanced situation in terms of applications. And then everything else is in between. As I said, the redder, the more unbalanced it is, the greener, the more balanced. Now, if one goes to see the ratio of success rates between the two genders, so nominator female success rate, denominator male success rate, so ideally one would have seen 1 as the outcome of this calculation. You will see, first of all, that 1 is, every now and then, one could see 1 or 1.1 or 0.9, but in some cases we have very strong deviations from this ideal situation. However, one has to see that in 41% of all these competitions, since 2008 for the more senior scientists, and since 2009 for the junior, the younger generation of scientists, in 41% of these competitions, women had a higher success rate. So at this level of resolution or monitoring how the situation evolves, things are not as dramatic as the big numbers in terms of success rate present. However, we do have cases, for example, in physical science and engineering, as it was already obvious from the previous slide, where we have very low participation. We also have a very, very unbalanced outcome. So low participation, but also sometimes even 0% this ratio. So basically no success for women applicants. In other areas, for example, in social science and humanities, just for your interest, LS5 is the neurosciences. So you can go to the fourth column from the left, and you will see the performance or the balance in terms of success rate between men and women, or women and men, in neural sciences. And you will see, sorry, LS5, so the fifth column, not the fourth. And you will see that, for example, overall, with some exceptions, and what is very interesting to see in consolidators grants, we see a quite good and persistent over 1 performance of women during the last 4 years. Oh, we can do it from here. Thank you. So this is what the numbers say, but we want to go a little bit deeper and try to see whether there is a bias in the evaluation. And the way we're trying to see this, or we try to detect, it's an attempt that we started since last year, is to look at the text. And the text, we have 2 types of text that we could observe, we could analyze. One is of the application itself, so the case that each individual scientist makes for funding from the ERC, and then to look at the text of the peers, so the people who are evaluating the proposals. So we took data from 6 calls from 2012 to 2015, different type of calls, different younger or more senior scientists applying. And then we look and we analyze, basically, we do a word frequency analysis, looking at particular terms that could be linked to success or failure. And what we see is that, first of all, that at the level of overall calls, so this is a repetition of what I showed a bit earlier, that there is a persistent, with some exceptions, underperformance or lower unbalanced situation between women and men. So this is the success rate difference. Instead of ratio, you see the difference now in percentage points. But what we would like to see is whether this is because, first of all, people express themselves in terms of their ideas and track record, and how people evaluate them. So we look at this frequency analysis, and you see the terms that appear typically. These are the terms that we think that are relevant, firstly, and they do appear more frequent than other terms, and it's actually not surprising. Breakthrough, groundbreaking, challenging, complex. These kind of words do appear very often when one is trying to apply for funding. And these are the 3 domains, the 3 big domains. Now, the outcome of this was actually, we didn't see anything exciting. So more or less, both genders use the same terms in more or less in very comparable frequencies. This is differences in terms of use. And you see there are some words like impact, innovation, that one could see some spread in the data, but overall nothing really, and actually the colors again are the domains, nothing really dramatically persistent in the analysis. This is, again, during the first step of the evaluation, the same terms, and this is very important because what we have observed is the differences appear at the first step of the evaluation. So where the emphasis is more on the track record and not so much on the idea. The idea is a summary that is being evaluated, where the track record is in its full size, that is being assessed. So, outcome of this first level of analysis on the basis of text of the application is that there is a little bit of a variation. Male evaluators tend to write longer reports, except for the social science and humanities, whereas female evaluators have a much richer vocabulary when they assess the proposal. In terms of applicants, there's no clear evidence of gender bias or gender difference between the way people express their ideas, but there are some few words that appear more often in the evaluation of female applicants. The same analysis was done on the PI, so basically the track record part, and there you see it's not so visible that there are some differences for some terms, leadership, journal, citation. And this is very important because citation, impact, and publications were mentioned in the first intervention tonight. I think this is something that one should focus, how these things have been perceived from the point of view of applicant, but also evaluator. So you see differences in the three domains in terms of citations, top, groundbreaking, etc., percentage of differences of these, again, journals, top, excellent, experience. This is again on first step where the emphasis is on the track record of the applicant. And in terms of conclusions, some variation exists in some words. The way the evaluators read and then express their assessment in their summary of the evaluation. Female evaluators write slightly longer reports and have a richer vocabulary. This is very consistent for women evaluators to really spend, I guess, some more time to make the point of why a proposal is good or bad. In LS and SH, journal seems to be more frequently used than citation, whereas in the physical science and engineering, both journals and citations are used or appear on an equal level. In terms of applicants, we didn't see any difference in terms of the language used, the text that is being used. Work in progress, so we continue with this analysis. So there are quite interesting questions still to be answered. We try to model all this and see if we can come up with some kind of predictor, depending on, by reading the proposal, to try to predict what would have been the outcome of the evaluation. That's a little bit, perhaps not politically correct to say, but whether this type of analysis could predict better or at the equal level with the evaluation panel. How do men and women evaluate, men and female applicants, to do some kind of cross-reference analysis. And finally, to do a gender analysis on terminology used in applications, going also into the science and not at a very general level. Thank you very much for your attention.
Very much for this overview on the facts from the ERC perspective. Are some pressing questions? Yes?
So may I ask, how do we measure this gender bias? Because on one of the first slides there was mentioned training for the scientific officers to fight this gender bias. How do we measure it?
Yes, first of all, we need to detect if there is gender bias. We don't have any evidence of gender bias during evaluation. We have even, or the Scientific Council has even commissioned a couple of studies, including interviewing both panel members but also applicants. One important thing is that for the more junior segment of the applicants, we also have interviews during the evaluation. So it's also interesting to see if this is expressed during the interviews. So all these studies have not detected any obvious gender bias. There is, of course, the hypothesis of subconscious, so basically people becoming biased without even understanding or realizing that they are. So the idea is to train scientific officers who are present. They do not participate in the evaluation, but they are very well placed since they spent all their time observing the evaluations, to see if there are first evidence of any type of bias. For the time being, we have not detected anything, but as I said, the hypothesis of subconscious bias is always a possibility, so that's why we need to train our scientific officers. This is ongoing. The training is ongoing. They have not finished yet.
Okay, and how do you want to, if we don't know what we are going to observe or what we are observing, how do we want to measure if the procedure of this process, if it is correct, like if it works, if there will be less bias, I mean, if we cannot measure it?
Yeah, I don't think that you can measure it directly. You will see it, again, doing this kind of ex post analysis, looking if there are any trends that they existed in the past and now they have disappeared. One should be very careful because I mean, I'm a physicist by training, so in quantum mechanics is that once you observe something, you already affect the reality over there. So that means that one should not overdo it. It has to be very carefully done, because if panels feel that they are being observed, they may start behaving differently, not naturally. So this is part of the exercise, and it's challenging, I must say.
I think we have one question more. Yeah.
First of all, I was very impressed by the data you showed, so that was very good news. But I wonder if there is some bias introduced actually later on, when someone wins or is granted such a ERC grant, the way dropouts are treated. For example, if the group leader or if anyone of the co-workers is dropping out because of, well, childbirth, giving, whatever, then that time is just lost. So, and I think since women are mostly the ones giving birth, that might introduce a bias. So I wonder if, you know, something is, some statistics are on that line.
Yeah. This is a very good question. No, I'm afraid we don't have this kind of statistics. One reason is because Scientific Council does not want to overburden during the lifetime of a project of asking a whole lot of information just to monitor the implementation of the program. Nevertheless, and that's one point. The second point is that there is a principle, again, established by the Scientific Council, that the policies related to respecting or establishing gender balance in an academic and research environment is primarily with the host institution. So it's a responsibility of the university or the research organization that needs to take this, to take any measures towards this. It's not avoiding the problem for the ERC. The ERC needs to take care of its own house to ensure that the peer review system is unbiased. What happens afterwards, it's very difficult through funding to impose sometimes things. There is the grant agreement. You remember my first slide says that you better have a gender balance establishment and a gender balance implementation of the grant, or else there is a threat even of repercussions. But this is where one can stop from the point of view of a research funder. The big responsibility there is to the university rectors and presidents, and of course the hierarchy in these institutions, to ensure that any kind of policies is indeed implemented.
Okay. Thank you very much. And I'm very pleased to introduce our next speaker, Corinne Ward from King's College in London. And we will now move a little bit to coaching and networking, with a very nice title, Selecting the Best Across Gender. So Corinne, thank you for coming.
Thank you. I'm going to spend the next 15-20 minutes actually giving you something that I think is a little bit provocative on purpose, and actually speaking about mentoring being basically itself biased, and what I perceive as the forgotten side of mentoring, which is men mentoring. And, you know, I wish I would have more men in the audience, because I think my best wish is to speak to men many more times than I do now. First of all, a little word about me. Oh, I wanted to highlight something important. So, speaking about bias, I basically looked through, I was speaking, waiting to come here, I was speaking to a couple of kids who are coming here for Brain Bee, which is something I didn't know about, but it's like young, promising neuroscientists around the world selected for international competition, a bunch of teenagers. They had actually a competition in front of a panel of 5 world's neuroscientists, and there was 1 woman out of 5. So it's already telling the kids that it's normal to be 20%, and I'm going to go to that again. I think we have to be better at, preparing the next generation for something that's 50-50, not 20-80. So a word for me. I was lucky enough to be a kid in the 70s and in Brussels. And so that is basically meant to highlight one thing, which is, I think, being a woman in neuroscience or a leader in neuroscience as a female is a very different experience from country to country and from culture to culture and from time at which you're born. And so I was lucky enough to be born in Brussels at a time where women were basically throwing their bra out, giving the milk bottle to their husband to part feed their baby, all sorts of things that was actually very important to set a feeling that actually I didn't have a gender. I was just somebody who was having a future, and it didn't really matter what kind of body I had. And part of it is, at school, we were all having workshops and knitting classes, whether we were male or female. And, 30, 40 years later, I'm now in London, sitting in my office, and I see, boys' toys and girls' toys, and, pink and blue, and I don't know if it's culture or time or both, but definitely says something went a bit, wrong to my perspective. But anyway, so that's me and my history. And what this is highlighting is I think life is getting more and more complicated as you go along. And so my history in science is basically from birth to PhD in Brussels. I didn't feel any gender. And until the moment I did a postdoc, I was still feeling like we were all equal and it didn't matter. And it's only when I decided to become a lecturer and lab head in the UK that I suddenly felt the difference. And the feeling was basically given by the community, not by the fact that I was feeling discriminated. I didn't feel any discrimination or any judgmental behavior towards me. And, compared to the previous speakers, I never felt at any of these stages that I was, judged or perceived differently. I was lucky enough. But then, physically, basically, I was coming from a community where we were 60% females to suddenly move literally from one day to another, from a postdoc to a PhD, to a PI, and basically just physically suddenly realizing that I was only 1 out of 5, 20% of us PI. And I think that's really something we have to tackle and think about much more carefully. And we do, but we do in a biased fashion, I think, and I'll develop that a little bit more. The positive way of seeing it is that we move from 60% to 20% because actually, as females, we are much more likely, in average, to have higher number of life goals and more freedom in thinking and shaping the future. In other words, when we go from postdoc to PI, we actually perceive that we have a lot more choices than just becoming a PI. And male might not have this mental freedom to think that they could actually be still a cool male and basically decide to be, a house husband or, whatever else. So there's always 2 sides of a coin, and I think we really spend a lot of time on one side only. Okay. Illustration. When people read this, so this is a postcard I received as a joke from a postdoc, all right? We read this, and most of us in the room will think this is written by a woman. But not only that, we think that it's written by a woman who is actually married. Okay? And there's no expectation that the partner would support it. So thirdly, it actually tells you that as a woman, having kids is basically preventing you from tackling big goals. And somehow this is illustrating a lot of the layers of problems we have, and it's all about perception. So in an ideal world, this postcard should be gender-free. It should be valid for any parent, and that parent should actually be single parent, because if there is two people, there's always one people there to babysit while the other one is changing the world. And then two organized parents, of course, can both raise a kid and change the world. So this is not illustrating the fact that, I only care about parents. I think this is just illustrating the constant bias we all have, female and male, in our heads when we think about gender. Not only about parents, but about all of us in terms of member of the society. Okay, this is what I think is the biggest problem. So we more or less equally, in numbers, equal in numbers, females and male, and this is coming from a EU, stats documents on the web, and males are in blue. We're not in pink. It's lucky. But so you can see that basically we go from 50-50 more or less up to the point of PhD, and then it basically become more and more divergent to the point where we are 80 and 20 at senior level. And that stays on, pretty stable. When we reach professorship, we are as likely as men, more or less, to go for head of departments, dean, whatever else. So really, the difference is, as you start your professional life, you don't, basically a lot of us don't stay. Now, that's the way we actually always present it. But you can also see it on the other side. So a lot of us drop out. We speak about the leaky, system. But we also can say it the other way around, which is, why are all men, or most men, staying in? And I think this we never actually discussed. So is it normal to consider that all people, everybody who is doing a postdoc is good enough to be, or good enough, or skilled enough, or having the right profile to become a lab head? And I think discussions equally on both sides about whether you should really go for this job is a discussion that needs to be done much more seriously, equally across genders. So losing women, okay, but really we should also discuss keeping too many men. Is it that we select people with the right profile to become a PI? All right, so this is just to go back to this, promoting the female way. And so one positive about us dropping off is this business about having freedom of thinking and shaping our future. And there's this paper in PNAS that is not discussed enough, I think, which basically speaks about the fact that in this survey, at least, women who were all PhDs who were actually interviewed were basically feeling that they could be, a head of departments, but they actually didn't feel like these leadership roles were attractive enough for them to bother. And I think this is also something we should discuss. All right. So inside all the, big push, mentorship push that we actually see for the last 5-10 years, the whole narrative is on the woman's side. And the narrative is we're not confident enough, we question our path too much. Is this really a bad thing, or is it something we should actually tell men to do more often? We apply for posts only when we have all or most qualification for it, whereas men don't. And we basically told that as if we should really relax and apply for more posts, although we don't really have the criteria to do it. And there is something wrong about this. I mean, I think we should push everybody to apply for jobs when they really truly have the qualification and the skills to actually be good at that job. We trust the salary we get offered without negotiation. we should promote a society by which our leaders are able to offer you the salary that you deserve, not the salary that actually is the lowest possible, that actually expects you to basically negotiate like mad to get finally to the salary you actually should be paid at. And then finally, expecting the line manager to recognize our achievement through promotion without having to constantly ask for it. It's not final. And then basically, finally, this business of not being invited at a meeting often enough, I think a lot of us, and I'm counted in the number, don't really accept all the invitation. So because of other consideration in life, sometimes I say no to a big lecture somewhere in the world because I have something else to do. And that should be actually also, you know, a positive, not a negative. I don't think we need to constantly be on the posters speaking constantly to the same people, really, around the world all the time. And I'm highlighting this for one reason, which is that at least in the UK, I constantly see mentoring programs for women. And these programs have the underlying narrative that there is something wrong with us that we have to fix. We, you know, not across the genders, just women. And this is an example. So, you know, Women's Springboard program, all these things have to be, you know, told to women to do better. And the question is, you know, do we not all need this? Yes, we do. And you know, this is basically saying that we have to basically correct this. We have to be mentoring across the board equally. Final example, and I think that always makes people laugh, and we should ask ourselves why we laugh. So this is a document again from the web, 2013, not the Dark Ages, recognizing that there is a problem and how to solve it. And so the point that I want you to read is the confidence thing. So the main barrier is women's lower sense of confidence. A research amongst 3,000 UK managers found that 85% of women would only apply for a job if they met all the criteria. And this is an official document saying that this is a proof of low confidence. And then nothing else. We move to the next point. Now, if such a document was on the web and wording it that way, everybody would actually be shocked, right? And I feel that this statement here is not worse than the previous one. I think we should really be much more careful about what we say when we mentor and what we want to achieve. And what we want to achieve is parity, is equality. It's not manning up the woman. So, to summarize it, so I think that we have conscious and unconscious bias from education onwards to maintain a very narrow gender-specific expectation, and you know it's not evolutionary, you know, meaningful, but we do have very, very small boxes in which we put people. Women are still expected to be the main pillar of child rearing and caring of elderly parents. We can both do that. The schemes organized to solve the problem is itself biased, and that's the main focus of my talk, is, you know, on this mentoring being biased itself. And, you know, we should basically fix it. And so in terms of mentoring and sponsoring, I think big institutions such as the ERC, any big funders should now organize mentoring on both sides. And we should have mentoring sessions and networking and workshop, you know, involving all leaders, and most of them are male, to discuss how to value female characteristics and traits in leadership. That's what I have to say. So these are the 3 points I actually brushed into one statement, but this is the conclusion of my views. I expect it's not the view of everybody, but I wanted to state it. And again, you know, back to the first talk, I think we are much richer than our 2 boxes. We are a spectrum, and for the moment in leadership we actually select for a very, very small part of the spectrum, which is the very, very male, which actually exists in women's body as well. So some of us female are very male in their leadership style, and we don't really solve the problem of real diversity in leadership. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Corinne, for this beautiful talk. It's funny because you said this with the female traits and this mentoring. My co-workers, my male co-workers, ask whether it would be possible to participate to all this training and coaching that the female co-workers are allowed to do. And this impressed me because, as a matter of fact, it should be normal that they're allowed, but apparently it is still a problem, and this is only dedicated to women. So it's good that you mentioned this point. Thanks a lot. So questions? Yes? Somebody's running from the back.
Hi, thank you for that wonderful talk. I'm a third-year PhD student at Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee. What advice would you give to young women, not necessarily being mentored or trained into becoming counter equal parts to men, but microaggressions they face from seniors in in administration or PIs in academia? You know, that's a challenge, another challenge we face in addition to our colleagues. Yeah, any advice you can give? Well,
so I'm a firm believer in communication, and I never encountered myself, you know, obstacle when I speak back. So anything that we experience that actually we feel it's an aggression is 99% of the cases expressed by somebody who has no idea it's actually aggressive or demeaning, and basically when you speak back, you basically, you know, in a very civilized and nice fashion, they really are amazed that what they said had this tone or connotation or interpretation on the other side. And so communication solves quite a lot of problems. If communication is not enough to that person itself, you know, himself or herself, then you know, go to speak to the person, you know, the next in charge. But I think communication often to that person directly is solving most of the problem. The worst behavior is not to say anything and you know, swallow it and kind of move on, because I think then nothing ever changes. And most of the time it's totally unconscious and not at all, you know, understood by the person who acted.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's all right.
Okay, so thank you, Corinne. Now I will hand over to Ilka Diester and yeah, to introduce the perspective of man and woman in different aspects. So, Ilka.
Yeah, so now we'll move to a dialogue or a discussion with a couple of experts in family and career issues. So as it became obvious in the last couple of talks, family and career is not always easy to combine. And I would like to ask the experts now to come to the panel, like to the front here. So Jota how do you pronounce your name? Poriasi. She's a research director at the Institute of Molecular Biology and Biotechnology and the Foundation of Research and Technology, Hellas. Yeah, please take a seat. She uses computational modeling techniques to study neuronal and dendritic computations. So that's her scientific life. But she also has a private life. So she has a husband, and he's also a professor in computer science at the University of Crete, and they have together 3 children, 15, 13, and 8 years. And their parents live in different cities, so already indicating that there might be some challenges. Then we have Johannes Griff. Please come to the front. So Johannes is an assistant professor on tenure track at the Brain Mind Institute at the EPFL in Lausanne, Switzerland. And his main research interests are cellular and molecular underpinnings of cognitive dysfunctions and neurodegeneration and post-traumatic stress disorder, with a particular focus on epigenetic mechanisms. Again, that's his scientific life. Now his private part, or private life, is his spouse works as a scientific expert at a pharmaceutical company in Bern. That's like a 1-hour commute from where they live with their 2 children who are aged 6 and 4 years. And then we have a really cool add to this panel. So you see, like, we have a female and a male perspective, but we even have, like, now a child perspective. And for this, I would like to ask Eva Kyriakou. So not exactly a child anymore, but used to be a child. So Eva is like a 19-year-old university student, and she's the daughter of Professor Corinne Watt, who you just heard before, and she will give us an insight of how a child perceives the workload, traveling, and so on of a scientific parent. All right. So with this, we are going to start, and I will ask you a couple of questions. Afterwards, there will be an open question and answer session where you have the option to engage in the discussion, so you as the audience. So the first question would be about the distribution of the workload at home, so the family work, if you want, so like taking care of the kids, taking care of the household, shopping, and so on. And I would like to ask first Jutta, how is this organized in your case?
Okay, does it work? Yeah. So in my case, both myself and my husband are full-time academics. So what we do is split it 50-50, let's say. One day I pick up the kids and do the shopping, the next day he does it, and whenever there is a conference or a meeting, something like this, we bring over help. We import the grandmother from Cyprus, and, and she takes care of the kids, and that's how we do it. But most of the time is like, you know, we split it 50-50.
Mm-hmm. Good. So Johannes, what's the male perspective?
Perspective is not different, so we also split more or less 50-50, I have to say. It's not 100% 50-50 because my partner, she only works 80%, so she essentially stays one day at home with the kids. That's intentionally so, that is her choice, and but the rest of the time it's very much 50-50.
Yeah, there's of course like a very good example. I'm pretty sure there are often cases where it's not as equally distributed. And of course, I mean, here we have the lucky cases of like intact families. Often there are single parents where it might be a little bit more difficult, right? Now, since we have Eva here on the stage, I would like to ask you, and I think everybody who has kids would like to ask their kids, so how is the scientific, or is the workload of a scientific parent perceived by a child? So like we tend all to bring a large amount of work at home, or we stay long at the university. So how is this perceived? How was it perceived by you personally when you were younger?
Yeah. Well, I think obviously it's a case-by-case basis, but with my mum, she would generally go to work later, mainly because she wanted to lie in, but and come home later. But it meant that in the morning I saw her a lot before school, and then maybe she would come home later in the evening, but we'd have time together in the evening. So I was well aware that she was working hard, and she would bring home a fair amount of work, and obviously go away for conferences, meetings, etc. So I was aware of that. But there was she definitely, I don't know, maybe she did it on purpose, but she definitely had time for me and my sister as well. When we were tiny, and also now, like it hasn't changed much at all. Yeah.
Well, I guess every parent in the room will wish that the same will be said by their kids. At least I'm wishing this now, like in 18 years, my daughter will say the same about me. Now, we are at a scientific conference, so like you all had to travel here. And this happens quite often in the scientific life. So how do you arrange your travel commitments such that your family life is not completely impacted, or how do you kind of like compensate?
That's a difficult question. I have to say that my daughter, who is 8, complains all the time about me being away. The boys don't care that much. They're older now, so that, yeah, gender bias, exactly. I wouldn't say I do something particular apart from trying not to travel more than once a month. So that's my limit, but still that might be too much for young children. And the same for my husband. He travels a little bit less than me, but we also try not to be away too often, and also not to be away at the same time, because that seems to be more stressful for the kids, even if they're older now.
Johannes?
Well, so I travel quite considerably more than my partner. She also does travel, but less so. And I do try to compensate. And now, as the kids are getting a little bit older, this is less important. But for instance, when my son was 2 years younger, he was about 2 years old, he literally would wake up 6 to 7 times every night. And so obviously, so when I said the 50-50 share before, this meant also that my partner takes one night, getting up during the night, and I take the next one. And so these were very tiring days. And then on top of that, if I then was traveling, then I would do a few nights before more and a few nights more, because obviously when I'm away, she gets to do the main chunk of the work. So this is a little bit better, but I still try to compensate for my absence.
Do you guys try to kind of like cut down the length of your travel, like make it shorter, or is this like not impacting?
Yes, this is actually disproportionately to their independence. So the kids are a little bit easier to deal with now, and as they're getting older. But I actually do cut down on my travels. I try to do it like Jota, to not travel more than once a month. So this is, I think, very reasonable and very good for the family.
I mean, we now have for the first time these childcare grants here at FENS, which we are very proud of, which would allow, especially postdocs and PhD students to bring their kids. Have you ever done this, bringing your kids to conferences?
I've only done it once, and that was in a meeting in Greece, so it was easier. My daughter actually would love to come. She asked me to bring her with me, but I don't know if that would be really fun for them. No, it would be okay for us, but I think they would get bored. As I said, the boys are too old to care about these things anymore. So, no, not really. Maybe the younger generation.
So I have never done it, to take the kids. Also, my daughter is asking for it, but I would certainly not take her to a conference like this, 6 days long, with satellite meetings and everything, but maybe just to a talk or an overnight stay somewhere. This, I think, could be fun, but I don't see the point of bringing them to a conference where I'm not available, essentially.
Okay, I see. Now, this is really a personal question. Do you feel guilty when you're traveling?
I do. I mean, on one hand, I feel that it's really good for, for the science, for my career, for the people who invited me, so there are a lot of reasons to feel good about going somewhere. But whenever my daughter calls and she's really upset and she says, "Mommy, you promised you wouldn't go away again," yeah, then I do feel guilty. Can't help it, I think.
Yeah, the same from the male perspective. I think I do feel guilty. At the same time, I also think it's part of the job, and I really like the job, and so that's the way it is. We just have to deal with it.
So how was it, or was it perceived by you, Eva, when your mother went away for traveling? Was this particularly difficult, or did you understand already at a young age that this is necessary?
I think when it was a longer amount of time, I noticed it more. But if it was a few days, and she was very good at, if she knew that it was a long conference but she didn't need to be there for the whole thing, she'd come home early. And I noticed that. And for the shorter ones, I don't want to seem rude, but I didn't really miss her. It was just like she was away and she was coming back, it was fine, there was no big deal. But I think also my sister and I are very lucky that because our dad works part-time or freelance, that if it was possible, we'd go too. So there were a lot of holiday opportunities when she had a meeting or something. So that was also a benefit. But no, I definitely missed her for the longer ones, but in general, I thought it was fine. I never resented her for going away.
Someone is relieved. Okay. Now, so we talked a lot about work time and family time. Then there's another special type of time, which is time for you. So no family and no work time. So really time where she can spend just on leisure activities. How often does this happen, and how important is it for you?
Well, okay, so I don't actually do anything for me. I promised to myself many times that I would start going to the gym, are, doing something special, but there is really no time. And I have 3 kids, so I'd rather give that time to each kid every day, instead of devoting some more time for myself. So I don't think it's the right decision. I wish I have done it differently, in the sense that people do need some time to be alone and relax. But I have 2 kittens and a dog, and that also helps. I spend some time petting the animals. And let's say that's my alone time.
With the dogs.
With the dogs and pets.
Johannes?
Yeah, so for me, I very much appreciate time to myself. It's not that I get it a lot, but I do realize in our relationship that I have way more evenings out with friends, for instance. Or also I do appreciate traveling to conferences like this alone, and although it's work, and yet I'm free of the family. So I don't have to think about walking slower with the kids, for example, or just who's hungry and who's not hungry. So I feel free, although it's a different, of course I'm at work, but then proper time to myself, yes, I do try to meet up with friends. I do some sports, maybe 2 to 3 times a week, not more, but yeah, it's definitely a very important aspect for me.
Yeah. I should also add that the flight duration is a good time to be alone.
Working most of the time, but as you said, you're away from the worries of the family. So
yeah, if we count that, then there's more.
Yeah, well, sort of. No, I think it's very important that you do take care of yourself. Otherwise, you cannot be a happy person, and it's not good for your kids anyway. How is this special time of family and of work perceived by a child, or if your mother ever had this time, like Eva? Did that ever happen, that you even realized that your mom was not there because of work and she just took some time off?
I don't think I noticed it specifically. Like it didn't sort of come out to me that she was maybe taking this time off. But she's very good at balancing everything. I think it's actually quite impressive, and it's something that I try to take after my mother, is balance. And so I think there are definitely times where she cracks and she screams like, "I need space!" And we very much know then to step away and give her some time. And I completely appreciate that it's very difficult. But I don't think I noticed it. But maybe now looking back, I should have been a bit kinder and given her a bit more time to herself. I don't know. No, but yeah.
Okay. So now the last and final question, which is a little bit ridiculous. I think I know the answer already. If I ask you, what is more important, family or your career, your job? What would be the answer?
Family, of course.
Yes, the same here. So it's quite interesting. When I was still a postdoc in my last year, I read a very influential for me blog by a Harvard PI, a female Harvard PI, who had just gotten tenure. Of course, it was a little bit easier for her to write this back then, but she wrote essentially that, and her husband is a doctor at Harvard Medical School, so you can imagine the workload right there. They have 2 kids, and she said she would never risk the career over her family. And that was in 2012 when I read this, and I told myself the same thing. And although I'm still not sure if I will get tenure, but it's not that I would work, day in, day out, night in, night out, and at the end of my pre-tenure period, not know my children. So I think it's a very clear choice that the family is more important, and if it doesn't work out for tenure, well, then so be it. But that's I'm not willing to pay that price, essentially.
Yeah. All right, I would really like to thank the 3 of us for sharing these rather private issues with a larger audience. So let's thank, first of all, the 3 of you. And now I would like to invite everybody to join the discussion. If you want to ask the 3 experts or me or the general audience for an opinion or want to share your thoughts, that would be really appreciated. Please.
Hello. Okay, this is super tall, but okay. Can you all hear me? No? The mic? Okay, no, it's not. Okay. Well, okay. First of all, I want to thank everyone that presented because it was a super incredible talk. And I was debating with myself if I was going to ask my question or my comment during your contributions, because I do value the difficulty of being a woman in science and the duality of the gender binary, male and female. However, and in the first talk this was talked about, we need to talk about people that live outside of that binary as well. And we already had a question about intersex people, and we never talk about transgender people as well. And there's a huge bias also towards that. And I wanted to hear opinions in general about this, because since we know that we value both male and female characteristics, why are we still so close in this binary system where we still categorize people, putting them in a male box and in a female box, and we don't talk about anyone else in between? And all the statistics as well, they were all about male, female. Where's the intersex and where are the people in between? This is my question. Thank you.
Well, I guess this is a question to mainly the speakers before the discussion, unless you want to comment.
Yeah, I'd like to say something. I feel, well, I hope that my generation, even though I'm definitely not that much younger than a lot of the people who are at this conference, there's very much a shift that I felt. Even within the past 5 years, so the beginning of my time at secondary school, the whole idea of being non-binary or transgender or intersex was not mentioned. And it's not because no one wanted to mention it, it just didn't come up. But now, especially towards the end of secondary school and now at university, it's very much a topic of conversation. I've come across more people who have come out as non-binary, and there's very much a sense of acceptance of changing the language that we use. So not saying male and female, but saying all genders. And that's definitely something that's, I don't know if it's just in the UK, but it's definitely something that's incorporated into university life. So I hope that maybe with my generation and the people who are at university now, there will be a shift, because I can see that shift already starting. Mm-hmm. So yeah, hopefully that will be the case.
I mean, I might have a question regarding, maybe to the ERC representative. Would it even be legally possible to ask for these, let's say, this gradient of male-female in the application?
Yeah, legally, I have no idea. I think it's something that, there is, in a way, a contradicting relation between what is legally possible, what is something that still respects personal data.
Does everybody hear the answer, actually?
Yeah.
So it's a very complex question. I really appreciate the question. I take very seriously. Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, I think it's a very valid question. Perhaps we're missing a very big part of reality by presenting the way we're presenting data. It may be an issue of legality because it is very much not contradicting, that goes into conflict with other very fundamental human rights, which is the right of privacy. So it's very difficult to produce this kind of data. It will probably require a very well designed study and not for sure using standard data. That's the only thing I can say now, but I'm taking a very, very serious note of this request.
Mm-hmm. So, Iliana?
Maybe I would put it in the other way around. So why should be important whether it's male, female, or transgender? So I think in a best of the words, it's important to be scientist. And it's not important, so I think that all this direction to categorize whether it was female or male, so I think in my opinion it is not relevant. It's important to be scientist and to qualify or to evaluate the quality of science. So this is how I hope that one day we will be at the level to be absolutely irrelevant, and this is private life, exactly. This is an aspect that I personally, when I hire somebody, I don't even care if it's male or female. I started with a group of males, and over the years it was fluctuating. Now we have almost only females in my group. And in 10 years maybe it will be 50-50 or it will be 20% transgender. So I personally don't care. So this should be people with whom I work, and that's it. Yeah, so this is my perspective on this. Maybe it's too naive, maybe the real world is different, maybe I'm an exception judging like this, but I think it would be a perfect world if we don't deal with this issue so much, but with the other aspects that should interest us more. Corinne?
Yeah, sure.
So I'm flashed by the light.
Sorry, just to answer that, obviously, that would be the end goal. A world where you don't even have to categorize yourself. But if we had that, we would not have this debate about men and women, because we would not have this division. And the idea is, we have now 2 boxes. Let's make those boxes a spectrum, and then let's remove the whole spectrum. But you cannot do that, like jumping. Yeah. And the whole thing about focusing on non-binary identities is, for instance, for me, as a non-binary person, it starts with a simple form. What do I fill in the form? It doesn't exist even. So it's never even considered in the conversation. This is my whole point.
But shouldn't that be really easy to fix? I mean, in the form, like in an ESC application, to just like either check this mark or say, okay, I cannot decide. That should be legally possible, no?
I think the issue here is that it's not possible to fill in the form. It's that people aren't changing the forms. Everyone knows that non-binary people exist, but people aren't changing the forms because they're because they've come out a minority, that people can't be bothered. They don't see the impact that it can have on someone's life if they don't know that person, if they don't know a non-binary person. It's the same that if you, I think it can be done, it's just not being done because people just can't be bothered.
Yeah, what I meant is like, I don't see really that there is a legal issue of changing the form. I mean,
don't think there's a legal issue.
Can I add a complexity to it? I think it is a complex issue because it's not only sexual preference, it's deeper, psychology. So I am heterosexual, but I am very unfeminine I don't feel female as the female box defines female. And of course, I always tick F because, I've been told to tick F, right? But if there was different boxes, I would probably take a different box, right? So, and the whole idea of boxes is only because the ERC and others have to try to figure out if there are biases, and they work on, having to look at whether it's a more male or a more female application to see if there is a bias towards, preference for male. If we would increase the number of boxes, I think it would still be possible for administration to make, statistical studies. So I think it could be changed, but I think there's so much diversity that, I think the most important is not to select for the very, very narrow male definition.
so introducing a slider then maybe, would be like, introducing a slider.
Well,
and then
as I said, I grew up in the 70s in Belgium, in Brussels specifically, in the countryside is another story, where I felt like my gender had no importance. I mean, I didn't feel like my academic career had anything to do with my gender. So I think this is what we have to aim for.
Perhaps to add something, I think it may be a legal issue because the purpose of an application is to try to get funding. So the information in the application needs to focus on the purpose for which all this information is submitted. Now, what we're talking about and what I presented is ex post analysis. I mean, it didn't, in theory at least, this information was not used during the evaluation. So I would repeat that it is a very valid point, but it does require some kind of other type of survey that will respect the privacy of the individual. So we could address the same question or a series of questions, including a wider spectrum of gender information to our applicants, But we need to receive information that does not reveal the individual who replies to this. This will respect and will make also them being quite open. But then it's not data that to be used during a scientific evaluation. It's something different. Okay, so it is possible to perhaps gather this type of information, but let's not mix them with the purpose of a standard application, which is for a research funding.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I just wanted to add something when you said that ideally, we shouldn't need gender. That was my first thought as well. Well, just take the boxes out of the application. We don't need it anymore. And then I realized as a woman and as a parent, and for a long time a single parent, that checking this box has saved me quite often, because I get the 1.5 years per child without proving that I actually took time off to take care of the child because I continued working. And that's probably not so much a problem of the neurosciences. That's where we import problems of society, which was also in your talk, because it's completely normal and expected, and especially in Austria, I observed it a lot, that it's the women who take care of the children all the time. And I did. So I was very glad about those boxes, but in an ideal future, it shouldn't be that way. It should be 50-50, as you said, and then we wouldn't need the box anymore. But I think right now we also need it for those purposes, just to save the women from dropping out because they have to take care of the children because their country is still not advanced enough to have a 50-50 solution.
Well, even the 50-50 in the case of women, because of their pregnancy and all the complications, still the 1.5 years is a saver. So
yes, definitely.
But I think if I can add something to this, I think it's great to have maternity leave, and I think it would be great to have paternity leave also.
Yes.
Because this is now a male perspective, if we want to enable females to say, to have a career in neuroscience, which is a lot of work, and despite having the children, I think the focus should not be only on the females, but also on the males.
Yeah,
so males, do your share,
yes.
and contribute to this. So.
Yeah, so the focus should maybe not be so much on how to make it possible for women to handle both a family and a scientific life, but how to make it possible for men to help them do that. So.
But there are paternity leaves, right? I mean, to my knowledge, the ERC also considers paternity leaves.
Yes, that's true. In Switzerland, which only accepted women's right to vote in 1989, as a country, no, there is no paternity leave.
Seriously?
No.
Oh, wow.
I think there are also tiny issues that can be made. So, for example, so I'm not talking about Germany. One expects that it's a well-developed country, but as you said, it's like Austria. It's expected that the woman take care of the child, and even if a man like my husband says, "Well, because we're commuting, I'm leaving on Thursday because I would like to take care of my child," then it is like, yeah, sure. But it's not well accepted. It is like, oh, this guy, poor guy, that married a wrong woman, yeah? So it's the same idea as that I mentioned in the beginning, and there are tiny things that can be done. So why to have meetings at 6 o'clock, 6 p.m.? You can make them, I mean, it's an issue that only when a female should take care of the child, and the kindergarten closes at 4, so it's impossible to take part of the meeting. So there are tiny steps that can be done, but it's just the wish, if you want to have this wish to advance. So I fully agree.
I was actually wondering why we have this meeting now at this evening time. I mean, because like everybody here on the panel, and like everyone has like small kids. So, I mean, next time we should have it at lunchtime.
So maybe next time we'll bring the kids with us. So this would be,
or have it in the morning.
Yeah, or having in the morning session.
Yeah, 6 a.m. Any more discussions, or please come to the microphone and.
I think many aspects were covered tonight, and I totally really like what has been discussed in here, but I think just a very tiny thing might have been skipped, and I just wanted to add, and if you have ideas about it, I would like to further discuss a little bit more. So, I mean, I'm personally in the very same position as you in, not categorizing people according to their genders, personally, I never assume anyone's gender if they don't tell me anything about themselves, for example. And I mean, yeah, to me, it wouldn't matter if my supervisor or my mentee would define themselves in terms of gender as, I don't know, tomato. I mean, to me, it would be totally fine. But for example, right now I'm an about to start PhD student, and in the past months I've been applying for different positions, and in some of those positions, and roughly in 30 of them in the job description and in the requirements and stuff like that, they were mentioning that if there were two equally eligible applicants, the female is going to be privileged. I totally understand it in terms of today's binary world's practical needs, and I totally support it in terms of today's binary world's practical problems. But just think about a person who is mentioned in their papers that that person is male, but that person identifies as a female and lives as a female, or opposite. So, I mean, in that sense, there exists an injustice. So, I mean, I think that women should be privileged in general rules, and the other men should not, but that person is going to be privileged because of the documents and so on and so forth. And I think these type of people are not feeling really, really good and content about all these things that are going on. So, I mean, I totally appreciate this female privileging, but some people are, I think, getting lost in this. So, I mean, I'm just wondering what's your take on this? How would you approach this problem as a PI to be in front of such a person, and so on and so forth? Thank you. I talked a bit too much.
So if I may answer, I think that it is an important issue, and for example, I had one of my members of my lab being rejected from a position because he's a guy, and that I don't think it's fair for men in this situation to give a go-ahead in women. So that's probably not a good solution. One of the things that I recently heard as probably a good solution is to advertise positions separately for men and women. Let's say we have 10 positions, 5 will be only for women, 5 will only be for men. That's a fair way, maybe, because this way you know already that you're competing with the same sex. Yeah. Or you could, if you want to increase the percentage of women, you can have 70 positions for women and 30 for men. But at least the competition is equal between the applicants.
Yeah, but again, that's even worse, because it's basically create the two boxes again, right? The whole point is not to have the boxes.
I don't see, honestly, a solution around not having the boxes when trying to fix the low ratio of women in academia. I mean, otherwise we're not discussing this issue, right? Because the whole point is that we have a very low percentage of women making it at the high ranking positions. What would be another way of fixing this?
But
add gender options.
You
add gender options, not have to have more than two.
Yeah.
The whole point is that people who are non-binary are also non-represented. I don't think that was the point. The point was that it's not fair for the other category, whatever that category is, irrespectively of whether it's men or women, right? I think that was the point.
Well, I'm
pretty
sure the point was that by saying we would equally, for equal qualities, we would favor female, meant that it was women. It was the classic box, and so therefore anybody who is not either completely male or completely female would not be considered. That was the point.
Oh, that was the point. Okay, so I misunderstood the point.
So my point of view is really, and it's only my point of view, but I think one of the biggest problems we have is that we're mixing gender with professional, which is not what we should do. We should really train ourselves to judge the person for his or their quality as a scientist, period. We're not interested in, their private life, their body shape, their color, their anything else. I mean, we want the best scientists in our lab, whatever they look like. They can be Martian as long as I don't care. And if we don't train ourselves to basically ban this business of being biased by how we look, what we do, who we, sleep with, we just have to just wipe that out. I mean, it makes no sense to me. It's going to be, it's never going to end if we can't, continue on this. And I think this business of favoring the women is a dangerous slope. I don't think we fix anything by it.
I fully agree. Indeed. And I think, at least in Germany, this sentence that has been added to the text, it was a measure because it has been noticed, this huge discrepancy between the number of students that start in the medical faculty, that is more than 50% women, and the number of full professorships, that is below 10%. And they wanted to repair this in a way or the other and to increase the number of females. But this is a very dangerous strategy. It's exactly like this quota for women. But I'm fully against this because I think it is not a favor for women, is my opinion, but it puts all the women in the end to be a quota. But I think it's ridiculous because women don't need this quota, to be honest. So, and I think this is an artificial measure, and I truly hope that the politicians will realize that this should not be like that. And I fully agree that this sentence should disappear from the text. We should care to have the best scientists and not female, male, or color, or religion, or whatever.
The reason why we have mostly male professors selected is because we mix up selection for scientific qualities with perceived self-confidence, arrogance in many ways, certain body language, everything that has nothing to do with the science per se, but with the perception we give to the panel in front of us. And I think this is really the core of the problem. If we tackle this, we will not have only professors out there. If we have more females leader standing for that, or whatever gender they are standing for this, we actually will change the selection process, and we will change that. We don't need to keep the boxes.
Yeah, I just wanted to fully agree. I actually have a colleague who does research in leadership and masculinity and femininity, where they found that women, in order to succeed into leadership, they need to be much more masculine than the men actually have to do. But they have to do that while still staying feminine. Otherwise, they would be not likable or something like that. So, no, I had another point, but I think I think about the selecting. So, if there was an equally qualified male and female, and selecting the female over the male, I've seen this in action, and there's a very simple solution to get around that. You never find a female as qualified as the male. I mean, judging, no, not that I think that is, but I've seen it in committees that the women drop out in the beginning because they are not considered qualified, and then there's only men left and there's no female to be selected over a male candidate, because it's sometimes very hard to compare scientific careers between people. So, I mean, ideally there would be an objective criterion, but it's always people judging people, and if people are biased, then this sentence won't help. That was my point. I didn't want to speak against women or something. Sorry if that came across.
Nobody perceived it like this. Okay, I think we have a whole line, at least two speakers. I suggest we take these two questions, and afterwards I think we move to a more informal discussion with some snacks. But I mean, these two questions we will take.
Okay, thank you really a lot for these amazing talks, really, thank you. I wanted also to ask you, I think also there's also talking, and we haven't really talked about, the cultural background of the person in order to do a selection. I think that, for example, in the northern countries, I mean, you are aware that it's not such a problem compared to the South countries in Europe, for example. Do you do any selection? Do you really look at this in the ERC or something like this? Thank you.
Do you want to comment?
Yes, I think this is another dimension which may or may not be related to gender, but in any case, the effort is that evaluation panels need to be as heterogeneous as possible. So in terms of gender, in terms of national background, in terms of country these scientists are coming from. So again, ideally speaking, this should not have an effect on the evaluation, so there should not be any biases. On the other hand, there is also a theory, or there are also people who say that the more biases you have in a panel, all those are basically negate each other. So at the end, the outcome result is very objective. It's hard to say. It's very difficult to say what is more prevailing at the end of every evaluation process. But for sure, what our scientific council is trying to establish as heterogeneous as possible panels. It's very difficult. Again, life sciences, some areas in life sciences. I just quote a member of the Scientific Council, Nobel laureate from Germany several years ago, saying that I always have this dilemma that if I put too many women in the panel in my specific area of responsibility, I know very, very well that I automatically depleting the population of potential applicants. So in some areas, at least 10 years ago, if one would overdo it by selecting panels to serve in the panels, at the same time, this had a negative impact, especially for senior scientists, on those who were very competitive to apply. So it's a very, very fine balance, and one has to be very conscious about this.
Sorry, I will going to get back again with the history of, yeah, of course, I think we all agree that we have to really look just at the science and not really the gender or any ethnicity, but like that we don't assess the background of the person. You cannot say that, for example, in USA, that a black person from a suburb had the same chance as a white guy from a big university. He might have a better scientist, but if he didn't have the good chance to go in a better university, the level is not the same. Same as someone that has to look upon his own identity, might have probably had a lot of trouble with his mental health, maybe had to drop school for a long time to just even getting job, get kicked out of his parents' house. You have to assess also the background of the person. I think that is also important, as same as the science. It was just that.
I agree completely with what you're saying, and I think I can't speak as someone in neuroscience, because I'm not in neuroscience. I do study biology, but that's a different issue. The basis of every single thing that's been said today is education, and educating not only women to step forward and be more confident, because we do often lack confidence, and not only educating men to maybe accept women more than they may do, but it's also educating society to drop language such as man up, or don't be a, I don't want to say the word because it's a bit rude, but basically a negative female term. Drop that kind of language and raise children on a more equal level, because then people will step forward and you won't have these issues. And maybe it's too late for the people that are in charge now, because most people over the age of 30 are probably more set in their ways. But the basis is education, because there is power and undeniable benefits in diversity. There are hundreds of papers, I don't have any citations, but there are hundreds of papers that say that more diverse businesses, societies, social groups, whatever, flourish over those that are more restricted. So we need to educate people to just scrap these identities that are placed on genders or people of different races or sexualities, religions, etc., because then we will flourish, and then that's where we need to start. It's not starting, obviously, discipline the people at the top that are making all the wrong decisions, but start at the bottom, because then, give it 10, 15 years, hopefully this issue won't be as large as it is now.
I think these were very wise words of our youngest participant in this discussion. And
thank you.
And also a very good final statement, so a very good last words. I would like to invite everybody to continue the discussion, but now in a more informal setting. So there are some snacks and drinks.